This webinar is being recorded. Continue. Okay, so we're all in. I'm seeing, do you see the numbers populating?
Yeah, but I don't see.
Okay, 3 panelists. So when you look at the list that says panelists,
Do you have
and then
the
attendees,
screen of the screen up for the title and all that?
I don't see that.
No, you need to share the screen. Who has the share screen for the slide that shows the title?
No, that was just the PowerPoint.
Well, yeah, but that's what I meant. It just shows.
That was for the Juneteenth title.
Oh, okay. So we didn't have one. Like the picture of the.
Okay, I see that there are a number of attendees here. If anyone is able to drop in the chat that they're here, if you could just type in the word here so I could troubleshoot some things. Okay, I see some people saying here. Very great. Welcome, welcome. Okay. We're gonna get started in a couple of minutes.
So CJ, we don't have this to show.
Okay. All right, so what I'll ask Dr. Smith and Ciola to do is to remove the video for now, or let's see. Okay, there she is.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm sorry I'm late. I had office hours.
We're glad you're here. We were happily waiting for you, so we're glad to see your face. Okay, so I'm just gonna do a quick setup here
Hi, Roland. Hi, Ciola. And
okay.
I have a question. Are you going to stream the video through your end? Okay, perfect.
Okay.
And you can hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, very good.
All righty. So if, let's see what's the best way to do this. All righty, so we're just gonna get started. Can you hear me okay, Nikki?
I can hear you perfectly well.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this afternoon engagement. My name is Dr. Ajama Wogu. I am the Associate Director for the Multicultural Center with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So I'm here in our new Multicultural Center. We've relocated to College Way, which is the old Weiss House, or the old H&D building, housing and dining, as many of you know, it to be. So we're in the space today. My earpiece keeps falling off. Maybe I'm so excited to be here that it is just sliding out, popping out of my ears here. And we are practicing social distancing here, but we do welcome you all to this physical space. Students are starting to come in and study and just kind of decompress after class and just spend time in this space. So we're excited. You can see our banner in my background image here. That we have on the wall in front of the building. And so welcome everyone to this engagement titled Waging War on Racism, How Individuals and Organizations Can Foster Anti-Racism. So we had about 120 people register for this engagement, which really speaks to how important and how urgent folks believe this topic to be. When you consider current events like the killings of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and Tony McDade and George Floyd, just to name a few, these incidents have really sparked a desire for many of us to continue engaging in these ongoing conversations. So this is our first talk for our faculty series. So we aim to do roughly 1 to 2 per month. So with this initiative, we're just aiming to partner with the resources we already have on campus via faculty members to engage us on topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the format for this engagement today is to hear from Dr. Ebel. And after her sharing, I'll engage her in some questions, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. And lastly, we just welcome you to stay until the end if you're able to engage us in this important topic. So now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Mickey Ebel. She's a Martha and Henry Malcolm Lovett Chair of Psychology and a Professor of Management with the Jones Graduate School of Business here at Rice. Her research focuses on issues related to diversity and discrimination. In her research, she examines subtle ways in which discrimination is displayed and how such discrimination is remediated by targets, allies, and organizations. And with that, I welcome Dr. Ebel.
Thank you so much, Ajama. And
You're welcome.
Thank you for inviting me both to you and to Roland. And it is just a pleasure to be here. So if I have any problems with I was just on office hours with a student and we were having just a little bit of a disconnection, a bad connection. So if that happens, just holler and I'll repeat everything, okay? I think it was from his end, but I had him log on again and it happened just a teeny bit, but a lot less. So it could be from my end too. We always think the problems in our lives are from other people's ends, don't we? And that's part of what we're talking about today, right? It's really what we're talking about today. So I want to welcome everybody, especially the new first-year students. I welcome you. I've said this before. I said it in my class. This is kind of I think I feel the worst for you, for these new first-year students, because you're the students who got robbed of your graduation. You got robbed of your prom, of a wonderful summer being free and running around as a high school graduate about to go into Rice University. And now here you are at Rice and we haven't solved COVID yet. And I just say to you, you know what? We know. We love you, we support you, and you're gonna be able to one day tell your grandchildren about this time and how you were entering college at this time. So that's what I have to say. Hang tough. You have a community, and this wonderful multicultural center is gonna be part of your community. So I just say to you, welcome to Rice. For the returning students, I say, welcome back. You already know we love you. And for the other people who are here as community members, thank you for joining us. And it's just great to be one of those community members. So I'm going to start by just giving a few remarks about today's talk and about how I came to this talk. Then you're going to see the talk, and then afterward we'll do a Q&A and also get perspectives from anyone else you might want to ask who are joining us as well. So again, my name is Mickey Hebel. I've been at Rice University for 22 years. That's a long time. That's older than some of you have been alive. So that's kind of crazy. Roland has been one of my friends for these 22 years. So he's been here longer than most of you have been alive too. I'm pulling you in, Roland. Okay, so anyway, my journey started in Partyville, Wisconsin, which is a town of 1,300 people. It's the home of the U.S. Watermelon Speed Eating Seed Spitting Championship of the USA. It's actually, if you ever play apples to apples, we have our own card, but that's about the only thing we have in Partyville. And so not a lot was happening in Partyville, and I did something that very few other people from Partyville do, which is, first of all, I went to college, and second of all, I went to college out on the East Coast at this place called Smith College. And Smith College is an all-women's college, and while I was there, I learned a lot about gender issues, and I learned a lot about the pioneering women who came before me, who allowed me to have the right to vote and probably enabled me to be here in front of you. And so at the end of my 4 years at Smith, I really felt like my eyes had been opened, and I was a big feminist, and I was also very interested and focused on gender disparities. And I went somewhere after that, sight unseen, to a place called, and I'm going to tell you this place, and it's the only place that accepted me into graduate school. So I applied to 13 graduate schools, and only one accepted me, and that was Texas A&M. Gig 'em. Now, if you know anything about Texas A&M, and for you new folks, you may not know it, but Texas A&M is about as far on the socio-political spectrum as possible from Rice University, sort of from Rice, but from Smith College. From Smith College, which is a very feminist institution that's far left, to a registered Republican institution of about, I think 98% of people in College Station are Republican. So I really got to see the world from both perspectives. And I also it was a great place to study gender differences, and it was a good place to study racial differences, which I began to look at, and also just differences that stigmatized individuals' experience. But after 3 years of College Station, I was ready to leave Texas. I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm a Texan girl. So I applied and went to Dartmouth College and finished my degree. And I remember when I left Texas, I said, I am never going to come back to Texas again. It was the snakes, the country music, I was not a Republican. And so I said, you know what? I'm out of here. But what I've learned over the years is you never say never. So when I said I was never going to come back to Texas, it was only 3 years later when I got a job at Rice University. And I was so happy to get my job at Rice University. I applied to 114 positions, and I got my dream job. My dream job was Davidson College. But Rice University made an offer to me too. And I thought, I'm going to check this Rice out. And I just fell in love. And I have been in love with Rice University ever since. Now, my research up at Dartmouth, and while I've been here for the last 22 years, has focused on different types of discrimination. And it focuses not only on overt types of discrimination, so I don't like you because you are a member of group X, that sort of overt thing. Certain people aren't allowed here, or there's very systemic sorts of discrimination, which we are definitely seeing right now. But it also focuses on subtle types of discrimination. So I like to explain this to people as, if you can think of somebody you don't like. So right now, think of somebody you don't like. And if you don't, If you don't have one, I can give you some, people. But just think of that person you don't like, and they're walking toward you. What sorts of things does your face and does your body automatically do? Like what we know as psychologists is you tend to have an amygdala response. An amygdala response is something we have when we come in contact with negative stimuli. So we go like this. We kind of wince, and we're really good at hiding it, right? So then we do something that's like a Duchenne smile, which is a fake smile. So we go, oh. So what it looks like is we see that person we don't like and we go, hi, Roland. Now I love Roland. Okay, so that's just an example. But those are the kinds of behaviors that happen at an interpersonal level, and all of us are aware of it. We've all been in that interaction where we know that person doesn't like us, or we know we don't like them, and we've had that amygdala Duchenne response. Or maybe it's we just turn away, or we try to get out of the interaction sooner, or we avoid people, or we do all sorts of things. We make less eye contact, we smile less. Or one of the students have told me recently what they do is they get on their phone and they start pretending like they're in a conversation with somebody just so they can get on down the road faster. So it's those sorts of subtle types of discrimination that I'm also really interested in studying. Now I'm interested in the overt types as well. And then the other thing that I do is I look at strategies that individuals and allies and organizations can use to reduce the discrimination. So here we are in the middle of this crazy pandemic, and you might ask, what pandemic? Which one? And it is true that we have found ourselves in the middle of many pandemics. So there's the COVID pandemic. And by the time this is over, all of us will know somebody if we haven't had COVID ourselves. My brother was just diagnosed with COVID a week ago. And so he has it, and he is up in that little tiny town of Partyville. And I never would have thought that he would get it before all of the incidences in Houston would render me with COVID. But so we have this COVID pandemic. And we also have a racial reckoning pandemic. Okay, so we have never before, at least in my lifetime, seen the level of protests and the level of need to do something because of the racist policies that we have. And the police brutality has made it come to the forefront. We need to do something. And so we see racial reckoning, and there seems to be a new case almost every single day. And then I think, as David Lebron pointed out, there's also a xenophobia. We are afraid of people who are different, or we hate them, and it's people from other countries. And we're seeing this at levels that we have never before seen. So I want to tell you that this is a crazy time for us to be here in college. It's also a time where I feel like I look to the college students and I feel very happy and excited that I get to work with young people. And I'm going to tell you one little story, and that's that when I did a sabbatical, professors get a sabbatical every 7 years. And during one of my sabbaticals, I went on a semester at sea voyage. So I taught on a ship. And I got to go to 16 countries in Asia and Africa. And it was a real highlight because I really got to see the world. And when we got to Mauritius, we had somebody join our ship, our voyage. And his name was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So I sailed, will always be one of the highlights of my life, is I sailed for about 7 days with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I didn't get a lot of FaceTime because I'm just a professor. But what he did is he talked to all of the students, and he told them that he was really excited to talk to them. And it was a question and answer period. And the students asked him questions. And one of the questions was, what are you doing on this ship? You're a Nobel Peace Prize. Like, why are you here on a ship? You could be on a yacht. You're Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And he said, I'm here because I love to interface with students and because I believe in students. And students are the great change makers of our world. It's the young people who are going to get our place and put our place in a better situation. And I remember being like in my high 40s, and I was like, am I a student? Am I young? And I just felt like very excited and inspired by him. And I feel that same way when I look at these racial reckonings and these in the xenophobia. I look at it when I think of the problems in our socio-political life. I think, you know what? The young people are going to help us. I don't put that burden on you. I don't put that burden on you, but what I see is an increased belief in diversity. I see people who 20 years ago, when I was teaching about LGBT about topics that had to do with LGBT, people were afraid. They were in the closet. Now I have students who say, Professor Hebel, as a gay person, I want to tell you, as somebody who's trans, I'd like to tell you my perspective. And I think, rock on, rock on. And so it is the case that when workers go out into the workforce now, diversity is a much more important characteristic to them than it was to people in my generation. And so I do think there's hope. However, with that hope, I also say there's an understanding that people are hurting and that people are scared and that people are exhausted. And so it was that when we had the inaugural lecture series on racism for Juneteenth, in June of this year, I was asked to be one of 9 speakers on a panel that talked about Juneteenth and about racism. And I will tell you, you're going to hear me make reference to being the 9th batter. So when I was at Smith College, I played on the softball team. And if you don't know anything about softball, I'm here to tell you that you put your weakest batter in the 9th position. That's the one that's not very good. And I will also tell you, when I was on the Juneteenth meetings, I was the 9th person, okay? But what you're gonna hear me say is, I'm just happy to be in the lineup, okay? And that's what I have to say. So what you're gonna hear is my talk that focuses on what individuals and organizations can do to reduce racism. And then afterward, please feel free to ask questions. And if I can't answer them, I'm giving all of the hard ones to Roland. I'm kidding, but we will all try to help answer them. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to you to play it.
Great.
Racism.
Hello, Rice community. I played softball in college, and they always put the weakest batter in the 9th position. I'm in the 9th position, and I have gone before one heck of an amazing lineup today. But I am just happy to be in the game, and I'm happy to be tuned in with you today on such an important occasion. I thank our dean, I thank our provost, and I thank our president for organizing this Juneteenth lecture series. And I also thank each one of you for tuning in and for being willing to learn and stretch yourself. I've been studying discrimination for 25 years, and I think after 25 years, I should be at the top of my game. I shouldn't discriminate. I should excel at being anti-racist. But I sit before you as someone who tries to be anti-racist, but sometimes fail. And I invite you to talk to let your own guard down and consider that you too are perhaps racist at times. We are each a work in progress, and I hope this talk will help you move to a good direction. About 2 weeks ago, I got invited to write an article on racism. And whenever I publish, I always think about my current graduate students. This time was slightly different. I decided to invite 13 of my former Black students from Rice University. 11 of them are now currently holding or almost have their PhDs in psychology. They're in academia at schools ranging from Yale to San Luis Obispo to Indiana University. They're in business schools from Creighton's B School to Berkeley's Haas Business School to Columbia's Business School. They include a director of diversity at Allegheny College and a director of diversity at UT's Health Science Center. I also invited a 2020 grad who's dedicating himself to spoken word and coaching others. And I invited a current student. You might know him as Rice's current impressive Truman Scholar. I invited them because I wanted to lift the voices of young Black scholars, and because, well, they're Rice students and they've worked with me before, and I'm no dummy. They're way smarter than I am. However, I feel it's important to tell you that I speak with them rather than for them. In our article, we make 5 points which I want to share with you. The first 3 points particularly speak to the context of why we need to reduce racism. And the 4th and 5th points directly address the way in which individuals and organizations can reduce racism. The first point that we would like to make is that many Black people are exhausted. It deepens with each new death at the hands of police brutality. It results in reduced productivity, a decreased ability to cope, decreased feelings of self-worth, a desire to zone out, and a lack of getting restorative sleep at night. And if any of you are feeling those things, you are not alone. Importantly, research shows that racism has real psychological and physiological effects, and my colleague Danielle just spoke about some of those. Racism leads to chronic stress, and this chronic stress is associated with chronic diseases, hypertension, PTSD, depression, and heart disease, just to name a few. What is clear is that Black people are currently in a state of psychological and physiological crisis, during which Jennifer Bratter aptly called this morning a tidal wave of racial reckoning. And people seem to be taking a lot of action, but unfortunately many, particularly white people, don't know exactly how best to respond. Many people have written or expressed feelings about their uncertainty of how to act and about their experiences of cognitive dissonance, which is a psychological discomfort. And some common reactions include responses such as, well, I try to treat everyone equally, or I try to do the right thing, or I'm not racist, but why do I feel this discomfort? And how can I possibly make a difference? At a time where it's important not to be silent, my colleagues tell me that there are actually some dumb things you can say. We should avoid saying, I know just how you feel, because we don't. Things will get better, because they've heard this for decades. There are just some bad apples in the police force, because there are more than just some bad apples. The tree seems to have a disease. Or all lives matter, because that's shifting the narrative away from the disease, which is racism. And unfortunately, these sorts of comments, which may be well-intentioned, can actually add to the exhaustion and stress that Black people experience. A second point my colleagues make is that racism extends beyond police brutality. It exists in other spheres: housing, the labor market, education, healthcare, and the criminal justice system. And it's cumulative. The disadvantage accumulates across generations. It accumulates across a single domain. A poor elementary education often restricts later education. And it accumulates across domains. As Alex Berg aptly showed this morning, housing often influences education. Research shows that within race differences can be even larger than between race differences. In one of the most disheartening studies I've ever read, Jennifer Eberhardt at Stanford found that Black men, particularly those who look more versus less stereotypically Black, are more likely to get the death penalty. even after controlling for the severity of the crime. In our own research, we found that highly stereotypically looking people have decreased social networks and receive relative to their less stereotypical. And you see how we control for these with the images, with some of the images you see right here. It's terrible that the color of skin in 2020 affects real academic advisors' decisions about which students they recommend for taking difficult STEM classes, but that's exactly what we found. These academic advisors from all across the country were less likely to recommend the more versus less stereotypical Black women, an example of what you can see here. We found the same pattern for Hispanic men and women. Basically, the more they look white, the better off their opportunities are. It's also important to note that racism isn't just the overt discrimination. Racism involves the subtle behaviors too, the unfriendly stares as you see here, the behind doors gatekeeping that keeps Black people out, and the microaggressions that Danielle King so clearly explained. These more subtle areas of discrimination are the focus of much of my own research, and these are taxing beyond belief. A third point my collaborators also stress is that even with all the racism that is targeted at them, Black people are still blamed for the racism they experience. The American dream and the myth of meritocracy states that if you just work hard enough, you'll succeed. Or if you don't succeed at first, try again. And unfortunately, when Black people don't make it, too often they're judged as not having worked hard enough, not being good enough, or only awaiting handouts. And if Black people upset the status quo, as we so vividly witnessed Colin Kaepernick do over the last 2 years, they're punished. Colin silently took a knee, and he was vilified as anti-American and blacklisted, an appropriate word, from playing in the NFL. As a discrimination researcher, many people ask me, how can they reduce racism? What can they themselves do? And this is the fourth point that my collaborators and I make. Our education and awareness is paramount to reducing racism. These are actions we can adopt at the individual level. Each of us needs to invest in becoming more aware of African American history, not the more whitewashed version of it that we've long been given. We need to read the works and words of Black and diverse scholars and of all the scholars who are working in this space. I've listed some books that were recommended to me. Perhaps you've read some or might be interested. I just finished How to Be an Anti-Racist, and as an academic, we need to engage in what Ibram Kendi refers to as educational suasion. We try to teach and persuade students to be anti-racist. Related to this, education and awareness often give rise to anti-racist behaviors. Research on effectively reducing racism suggests that we first need to become aware of the problem. That is, all of us are biased. We need to own this. We are all sometimes, perhaps unintentionally, engaging in racist behaviors. We need to sit down and sit with the discomfort this causes us. We need to listen to experts and reflect. And then we need to use that discomfort, that cognitive dissonance, to motivate us into acting. We are not off the hook because we know that everyone else has biases. This is harmful thinking. Instead, we need to realize that we can each be part of the solution. We must be motivated to act. And then we need to look at our options for acting and set goals. Empirical research suggests that goal setting that's most effective, and particularly in the sphere of reducing discrimination, are goals that are SMART. They're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. What else can we do to reduce racism? One study my student, who is now a professor at Cornell, did showed this in her undergraduate thesis. She conducted a field study to see how effective allyship behavior is in condemning or condoning discrimination. She asked people walking by on sidewalks to stop and participate in a research study. Their job would be to give their responses to the acceptability of racism. but they had to give their answers after they heard an ostensible participant, who was actually an actor in our study, either condemn or condone discrimination. Importantly, we found that allyship worked, and we replicated this just 2 years ago. When actors condemned racism, our participants did too. But unfortunately, it also worked the other way. When actors condoned racism, so too did our participants. This finding lasted up to 2 months later, so modeling allyship is critically important in reducing racism. My colleagues and I have compiled a list of other things that we can do to reduce racism. You might look over this list and hone in on one thing that you can choose as your own goal. What are you willing to commit to? Can you find something? As my colleague Larry Perkins likes to say, diversity and being anti-racist is intentional and deliberate. And when he comes to talk to my class, he points to people and he says, sort of like the Lorax by Dr. Seuss, that is up to you. It's up to you, and it's up to me. And when he points to people, what he's saying is the burden is on each one of us. So please try to choose something here or elsewhere and make it your SMART goal. And then make it public. Tell someone else what you're planning to do, because we know that public commitment increases the likelihood of action. The fifth and final point my colleagues articulate is that we need anti-racist policies and accountability, not empty promises and more empty promises. These actions are steps we can take at the organizational level. I'd ask you to consider, as the authors of this recent Harvard Business Review ask, is your company actually fighting racism, or is it just talking about it? It's a good read that I recommend. Certainly, many organizations are publicly acknowledging that Black Lives Matter, but we need to hold these organizations accountable. Where were they 4 years ago, decades ago? Will they be here tomorrow, in 2 years? Is this change real, or is it only for optics? Two of our impressive graduates of our own IO PhD program, Enrica Ruggs and Derek Avery, wrote a piece recently published in MIT's Sloan Management Review, which I recommend. It describes why organizations simply can no longer afford to stay silent on racial injustice, and I hope you'll read it. I call out two organizations in particular, Nike, who stood by Colin Kaepernick. Granted, Nike made millions off of Kaepernick, but the other one is much more near and dear to my heart. And I admit it, I have a mutant ice cream eating gene. Ben & Jerry's is not just interested in optics. They're the real deal. And 4 years ago, we did research on their forward-thinking statements then. I'd invite you to sit down, maybe with ice cream in hand, and spend 30 minutes on the Ben & Jerry's webpage. It's not a one-line pro-BLM statement. It's not one paragraph, but 2 screens and many links and articles they have written which declare their anti-racist intentions and recommend to all of us achievable anti-racist actions. Please visit it and see if you agree with me. People also commonly ask me as an organizational psychologist, what can organizations do to reduce racism? In 2016, I felt compelled to respond to a surge of overt racism and uptick in the discrimination that was present in our socio-political climate. And I agreed to teach professional and executive MBAs in the Jones School about diversity management, or about how to optimize the future of the workplace. And I want to go into just very short detail of some of my take-home messages based on organizational theory and empirical research. Organizations who want to be less racist should begin by conducting an organizational needs analysis. What are the needs of that specific organization? These direct the goals and actions of companies. They should consider what a more anti-racist version of themselves would look like and how their organization would benefit. The needs of one organization are not the needs of another, so it's critical for organizations to identify from the start the outcomes that they most want. Organizations that are serious must also get leadership buy-in if they have any chance of being successful with organizational level change. Leaders should ideally not only buy in, but also be in attendance and participating in diversity initiatives. Diversity is not something that should be relegated to and led by HR. And one of the best local leaders I can point to is President Peter Pisters of MD Anderson, who talks the talk and walks the walk. And I'd invite you to look at the diversity and inclusion initiatives that he's championed and reinforced right here in Houston. Of course, organizations must have representation and mobility throughout the organization. So not promises of we will have this sort of numbers in the future, but numbers now. The demographic makeup of our country shows there's a little excuse of organizations not having diversity. The excuses of, well, none of them apply or they're just not interested is bull malarkey. However, Black people and people of color also can't get placed and then stuck in the lowest rungs of an organization or be relocated to diversity and HR positions. There must be movement. Research shows that organizations that are diverse have more transparent processes. They should remove fit as a criteria for hiring. Fit is too often a code word for just like me. And in predominantly white organizations, Black individuals too often lack that fit. And research also shows the power of structured interviews and blinded resumes on hiring more diverse individuals. There's a lot of talk about diversity training, bias training, and ally training. I strongly believe these should be empirically based and mandatory. We would never tell organizations that their safety trainings can be optional. And I believe diversity and bias training is safety training for diverse individuals. Now, clearly, single session trainings are not and should never be seen as a panacea. Finally, organizational leaders should be in constant communication with their diverse workforce. They should participate in employee research groups and ensure that they're getting feedback from and listening to Black employees. In conclusion, I want to say that the discomfort that many of us are feeling is important. It's really important. That is cognitive dissonance, and it's what motivates us to act. And I urge each of you to respond by waging a war on racism. Indeed, Black lives depend on it.
Thank you, Mickey. Wow, a terrific way to end our session this afternoon and indeed the series today. And
That's great, CJ. Okay. Are you able to see me, Mickey? You can see me? Oh, I can't see myself. 1 second, please. Okay, there it is. All righty. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful.
Mickey is muted.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm here. And
Great,
yes, I can
great.
see you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that wonderful presentation. Just some follow-up questions and reflecting on some of the things that you mentioned in the video. So you talked about racial distress. I believe you mentioned that earlier on. Do you have any tips for Black and Indigenous people of color to really manage any racial distress that they're experiencing?
Yes, I do. The first is to just, I think one of the things that we know about distress in general is the power of social support. And it's being around people who understand what you're going through. And there are, there's something called, is my bucket full, or how full is your bucket? And it's a children's story that I once read to my children. And I think how we get our bucket full of social support depends on each person differently. For some individuals, it may be filled by one person. By other individuals, it may be many people. But I think you have to figure out how to fill your bucket of social support and make sure that you have people you can talk to. That's one thing. The second thing I would say is one of the things we know about experiencing traumatic experiences, and that's what some of these experiences are. They become post-traumatic stress experiences. It's the reoccurrence of every single thing. I think keeping a journal or writing about them has been shown by the PTSD literature to also be very helpful. It's to indicate how you're feeling about it and to make sure that you can look across time in your journal and to see, okay, these are check-in points. These are points when I'm actually not doing as well as I am other days. And to just kind of have a sense of when it's time for you to reach out to your social support or to counselors or to other people who can help you. And to know that you're not alone, like the experiences we were talking about, all of the students felt it. There were times where we had to just stop and just kind of talk amongst ourselves and say, yeah, we know, and I'm an outsider. I can't know fully what it's like. I can listen. But to know that other people who are Black are experiencing the same sort of thing and you are not alone. So I would say just not knowing that you're not alone, journaling and holding yourself accountable to thinking about how bad is my stress right now. Maybe what I have to do is today it's so bad, I cannot watch TV. I cannot engage with other people. I'm going to have to turn it off because I need to take care of myself today. Other days I can join the fight, but to know kind of a sense of how you're doing. And then the third is filling your bucket with that social support.
Sure, that's wonderful, thank you. And also, you spoke a bit about gatekeepers. So I was curious to gauge your thoughts on like, what steps can Black and Indigenous people of color take when they're faced with gatekeepers who are thwarting their success or their advancement?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Jama. I think one of the things we have to be careful of when we tell people here's what to do is that Black people in this condition, in this situation, are victims. So to tell victims, here's what you do, is to like it's to say, oh, well, fix your problem. And I think there's danger in doing that. However, we do study those scenarios because there are times when people say, yeah, but what do I do? Like, yeah, I don't want it to be my problem, but what do I do? And I think, there's some things that the strategies that individuals can take, but I saw one of the Q&As and one of the questions had something to do with a lot of times people are in low power positions. So if you're in a low power position and you're diverse, and you're Black, it's like a lot of times your options are very small for what behaviors you can do. And I was told, for instance, when I got to Rice and I was experiencing some harassment that had to do with gender, I was told, you know what you should do is get the golden chips. Don't just put your head down, get the golden chips. And then as soon as you become in a position of power, make sure that you stand up and say things against younger people who don't have any power. So there's a number of things I can think of. One is if you are in a position of power or if you're not worried about your future, you can acknowledge, you can disclose. And sometimes people will hear something racist and sometimes they can say something like, excuse me, can you repeat that? And just that alone is enough to make people realize they're being racist. Or they can acknowledge by saying, in this situation, it seems to me that this is going on. But when people are under fear or threat or worries about retaliation, then it's far better for them to go to allies or to go to people who are in power and say, I need help here. And that really begets the importance of not relying on the victims themselves to get themselves out of a victimized situation, but for all of us to really examine the racist policies that are in play or in our organizations, and for the allies to speak up and say enough is enough, for the allies to listen, and for the organizations as a whole and the leaders to make sure they are doing the right thing. And there's never been a better time than to look inward as during the times of racial reckoning.
Sure, great, thank you. So I think we have time for roughly 2 to 3 more questions. So I want to acknowledge some of the questions that were submitted in the Q&A. There's a big paragraph, so I want to see if I could identify the question here. It says, wonder if the speaker has any thoughts on the need to continually reevaluate and refine how we define racism. For example, well,
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, I think so. One of the things we know about racism, okay, first of all, there's a lot of different beliefs on what race is and how race itself is sort of a weird proxy. If you listen to one of my favorite guys, Bill Nye, the science guy, he says we're all of one race, and it really has to do with melatonin and where we grew up and how much melatonin we got. And so, you know, this idea that 1% equals a certain race or 1 drop equals a certain race is really just this sociological or societal level construct that we've created. I think that we see race rear its head in different ways, and across generations, we see certain races become more disliked, more liked, more in vogue. We see the definition of race change. So there are some subgroups of races that, if you read Ibram Kendi's book, he'll talk about even within the Black race. In the time of slavery, some slaves were seen as better because they were from some countries versus others, or that people have colorism within Black community where light colored skin is prized more than dark colored skin. And I think, like, even now, if you look at, for instance, racism against Asians, I think we've seen a teeny bit of leveling off, but right at the beginning of the COVID, we saw a lot of hatred toward Chinese and a lot of like blame toward, well, this is the Asian flu, and very negative things. I think during 9/11, we saw racism against people from the Middle East rise up. And so we have this sort of racism, sub-racism that kind of goes with time. And sometimes it's high and sometimes it's low. And I think, again, during this socio-political climate, I think it's very high toward a lot of non-white groups.
Thank you. There's another question here that I'd like to acknowledge. The diversity of questions here says, what are some reasons why you would advocate for the Black Lives Matter movement, viewing it as a Marxist organization? And it mentions with goals of putting an end to capitalism and to the nuclear family.
Well, I like the first part, which says, thanks for giving this presentation. So you're welcome. I advocate so strongly for the Black Lives. First of all, I really thank you for writing exactly what your question is, because I want to hear every single question. And I think when we come to the programs like this and we ask the questions that we want to ask, that's really having the conversation. So thank you. For me, Black Lives Matters is something that I think is so important, because when people respond with all lives matter, what I say is, yes, but Black lives are lives and they're not mattering right now. And we see this in all sorts of ways, that there is just systemic discrimination. And so I think one of the most, what I would recommend is just to watch some movies or to look at some of the research out there. One of the movies I'd say is to watch 13. I'm going to get these numbers a little wrong, and I forgive me, but I think it's 6% of our population consists in the US consists of Black men, 6%. And yet when you look at the people who are incarcerated, it's 65% Black men. And that is not fair. And when you look at what's happening, you could say, oh yeah, but it's just the Black men are committing the crimes. But actually, when you look at what's happening is Blacks are getting incarcerated at much higher levels. And I was just talking to the postman on our block yesterday who's African American, and he said to me, you know, my brother went to high school with another person who is very wealthy. They both were selling cocaine. The white guy got off. My brother went to prison for 6 years. That's a problem. That's a problem. That's why Black Lives Matter, because we're incarcerating them. And not only are we incarcerating them, then we're taking away their rights to vote after that. So that becomes a problem. But it's not just the prison system. It's every system that we have in place that matters and predicts successes. It's where Blacks live. It's the educational systems. It's the fact that whites can often pull their kids out of the school districts and put them in private schools, and Blacks cannot afford that because there's also discrimination in the job settings. And so it's it's every fundamental aspect of life that we see that Blacks are being discriminated against. And so for me, Black Lives Matters is about looking hard at our societal distributions of resources and who we've given access to. I think it's Lyndon B. Johnson. He said, okay, so after slavery is over, you can't simply take the shackles off of Black men and then say, okay, go race against white men. It's like we have to think about the racist institutions that have prevented them from getting ahead and that continue to prevent them from getting ahead. So that's why, for me, it is not a Marxist organization. It is a calling. It is a movement about putting people's attention on the real problem, which is the racist institutions that we have. In terms of the nuclear family, I'm not sure how that relates to, I don't know how in the world BLM is anti-nuclear family, because I don't see that. But I would love to have that conversation, so feel free to email me and we can converse about that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ebel. And I know we weren't able to address a few more questions. If you are open to it, feel free to email us or Dr. Ebel. We might be able to expound upon those questions and give you some answers. Any final closing words, or what I actually wanted to ask you, if you will, so succinctly, what does it mean to wage war on racism? What does that mean?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say my last name is Hebel, H-E-B-L. If you forget, you can go, what the hell was her name? And then just change the first L to a B and add rice.edu, and you can ask my questions. And I see one there and it says, I'm nearing retirement. And I cringe when I see us saying that the young need to take the lead in solving these problems. If that's how it was interpreted, I just want to say I could not feel more different from that. I don't think that we blame the young. What I do feel is I get excited because the young understand it better. So that's what I was trying to say for that. Now, in terms of what it means to wage war on racism, I think it means that each one of us, whether we are white, Black, polka dotted, I don't care, looks within ourselves and say, what are we doing to contribute to racial inequity? It should not be that one group gets all the benefits and one group doesn't. So what am I thinking? How am I being a part of this? And I think that what we can also do is say, how can I be a solution? So just like this person said, it's up to each one of us to make our world more fair, to make decisions that do not have to do with racism, to say, are we using FIT? Are we using this belief in meritocracy? Because meritocracy is a flawed logic. Some people believe that they got to where they are because they worked hard, when really they were born on third base and think they hit a triple. So it's really about looking at the racism that exists within ourselves and within the organizations, within our families, and saying, let's try to eradicate that and really try to give everyone the same opportunities regardless of race.
Great. Well, thank you. We are at 1:31, and I just want to thank the attendees for being here. I have submitted an evaluation for the program. Please complete the survey if you will. It's in the chat box. Just know that there are resources on campus if you want to continue these conversations related to racial injustices, diversity, equity, inclusion topics. Make sure you reach out to our office, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Multicultural Center. The Office of Multicultural Affairs is also available here at Rice University. So we just give a big thank you to Dr. Hebel for sharing her insight and her research. That's it. Thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful afternoon.
And thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Very
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.